Hi guys, EDMacDesigns here. Today we're going to be doing a tutorial on Cinema 4D and how to import your text, your objects into real life images. Here's an example of what we're going to be creating. This took about 10-15 minutes worth of work. The biggest part of that was just aligning the object to the floor. That's all you really need is an idea. So what you're going to use, your text, an object, whatever you have, and you're going to need an image to start with. So yeah, let's give it a go. So on my new document, I'm going to put my render settings to 720p straight away. So that's 1280 by 720, and then just come straight back into the viewport. So first thing we want to create is, if we come up to you where the light is, we want to create a background. Then we want to create a sky. Now before we start, we're going to get the basics done. So if I right click on the sky in my object manager, come to Cinema 4D tags and add a compositing tag. And with the compositing tag, you can do several things. You can hide it from certain views, you can hide it from the camera, hide it from global illumination. That's all we want to do, is make sure the camera doesn't see it. So where you see seen by camera, just untick that box. Right. Now we want to create a new material. So you can either click File here and come to New Material, or you can just double click in this empty space and it'll create a new material. So we open the New Material Properties window, and obviously you're all familiar with this, so it's quite simple. First thing we're going to do is untick Specular, and for the color channel, if we click on this large box by here where it says Texture, we can import our own file. So I'm going to come and find the image for my background. That's the one you want the text to be applied to. The image doesn't really matter, but the more complex the image, the harder it's going to be. I will include this image in my tutorial just in case you don't have your own and you just want to follow along for the sake of it. So after you've found your image, press open. This box will appear. Now I'm not sure if any of you actually know what this box actually means. For example, say now I want to create my project and I'm happy with it, and I've clicked no for this. Cinema 4D will leave the file where it is. So in this case it's in a folder called Images on my desktop. Now if I give my project to a friend to render for me, he's not going to have that folder on his desktop called Images with my file inside it. So if you plan to move all your projects over to a different folder, perhaps a different hard drive, say you want to compress them or archive them for future, then click yes. But if it's just you and you know that you don't really move files around too much, and your work is your work, you don't plan to give it away or offer it to anybody else, you just click no. Straight away you'll see our image becomes part of our sphere over here. So we want to drag this sphere onto our background. And now straight away you can see my image is on the Cinema 4D viewport. If I render, it's just basically the image. Nothing fancy's happened yet. It may appear to be a little bit off aspect ratio, but that's not really a big deal. If you're really fussy, you can come back into the render settings and tweak the width and height to match your image or a smaller version of the image. Now next thing we want to do, which is quite simple, I mean on this image I have a crack which runs straight through this road. So it's going to be quite simple. Now my grid lines on my viewport, which I can move freely up and down, I want to try and align one of them lines with that crack. Now if you haven't got a significant object on your picture, perhaps you've got, I don't know, let's just say a very plain road, just find something that you can see that runs a certain way and try your best to align these grid lines with that object. It makes life so much easier for the future. By default now if I add objects, they're automatically going to be aligned with this grid. So to save this view, I'm now going to add a camera. So if we come up to our scene elements for here and click camera, just a standard camera, not a target camera, and in our object manager I just want to turn it on by clicking this little black square over here, and then I want to turn it off again. What that's done is basically saved our image, so if we ever did move around or move something or move that, we can easily bounce back to the way it was just by turning the camera back on. So next thing I want to do is create a plane, not a floor, a plane. So on your primitive objects, by here, if you click on plane, you'll see we now have just a square flat polygon in the center of our image. Now you can see straight away that it's kind of aligned correctly with the floor. So what I want to do is make it bigger. So I just stretch it across and stretch it across. We're putting these little handles. If you don't have those handles, or you can't see those handles, you can just press T on your keyboard and that will bring up your scalable arms. For future reference, E will bring up the move, R is for rotate, and T is for scale, just in case you guys didn't know that. So now that's done, if we render now, we're going to have a problem. Obviously the plane is just sitting there and it's clearly visible. So now we want to apply our material onto the plane as well. Upon doing so, you'll see our image now becomes part of the background. But it's obviously in the wrong aspect ratio, because Cinema 4D sees the plane as being flat. It's going to try and apply that material flat to the plane. So with the material selected up here, if we come down to our projection, it's currently on UVW mapping. Now UVW is just X, Y and Z. The reason why it wasn't called X, Y and Z is because you'd be confused with X, Y and Z with your movement and your X, Y and Z for mapping. So if you ever see UVW, it just means X, Y, Z. So we want to change that to frontal to match our image of the background which is being projected frontally to us. So if I render now, you'll see our image now is the same aspect as our background, but we have this very darkened version of the image. You can solve that very quickly. So once again, we want to come onto our plane, up in the Object Manager, right click, Cinema 4D tags, once again compositing, but this time we want to tick the box composite in background. What that means is that it's going to allow Cinema 4D to use the plane as an object, receive shadows, cast shadows, whatever you want it to do, but it's still going to behave like the background image. So if we render now, in theory, yeah, we now have it looking as if it's all one image, which is what we kind of want. So that's pretty much the hardest part done of it so far. You've got your scene set up, everything works, so it's probably a good time to save your project now. So I'm just going to call this tutorial. And now what we're going to do is bring our text in. Now it could be text, it could be an object, it could be a shape, a model, whatever you want. This is the time to bring it in. So on more graph, I'm going to select more text, and there's our text. So type in what you want the text to say, align it, how you want to align it. I'm just going to put it to the middle to make things a bit easier. I'm going to change my font, something a bit more beefy and thicker to make it a bit more easily read. And I'm simply going to rotate my text and move it where I want it. Try and stick to using these handles. Try not to use the free move, because even though it might seem as if things are going where you want them to, if you check in our 4-point view, they're not necessarily always exactly where you want them to go. So try and stick to using these handles if you can. Now by default, Cinema 4D will place the text directly on top of the grid lines. The grid lines we have already aligned to our floor. So like I said earlier, if you didn't try to align the grid lines to something on the picture, you would be doing that now, and you could be here a while trying to figure out what looks right, that doesn't look this, it should look like this, and you could be here quite a long time. So if we render now, you can see our text is pretty much aligned the way it should be with the image, but it looks extremely out of place. It shouldn't be there. You can clearly see that I've just stuck text onto the image. So the next thing we want to do is create the material. So I'm first going to make my text a little bit thicker just to give it a bit more definition. So again, double click to make a new material, bring up the properties window, and I'm going to, for the colour, I'm going to try and get something very similar to the car. So if I choose like a dark blue, something like that, okay. I want reflection, but I don't want any of these Fresnel or gradient, even though you may have been told to use Fresnel for a more realistic reflection. That's not necessarily the case. With the standard reflection enabled, if you tick the box called additive, it automatically makes the reflection blue. Now that's too bright, so we want to bring it down, something like that. Now that's going to give a much more realistic reflection than if I was to go and use Fresnel. There's not a great deal of point in using these for reflections unless it's purely for effect. But like that, you will have a true glossy text. Now I also don't want my text to be truly reflective, so I'm going to put a bit of a blur on there. Let's just try 5% blur to start. I'm not sure if you know, but if you blur anything when it comes to 3D rendering, your render time can double, triple. It can take a lot longer to render. Even if it's 1% blurriness, it can add a serious amount of time to your render times. But now that's done, we're going to drag that onto our text. And now we have blue text. If I render now, you can see that we have the text. It's taking a lot longer to render, like I just said, because of the blurriness. But already it looks more realistic. We have the reflection of the floor bouncing back into the text to make it look as if it's kind of more there. But it's still kind of not right. There's still certain things that we need to do. Now in this tutorial I'm going to use Grayscale Gorilla's Light Kit Pro. If you don't have this, you can just create an area light and enable shadows. It's that simple. But for the sake of a tutorial, I assume a lot of people have this Light Kit Pro. So I'm going to enable a softbox, just a standard softbox. Then with the softbox selected, zoom out a little bit, I'm going to rotate my softbox. Now don't forget, now on this car I can clearly see where these shadows are coming from. They're coming from the sun is up to the top right hand corner of the picture. So I also need my softbox to be in that kind of position, as if it were the sun. So I come back in and let's give it a render now. Now straight away you can see it's rendering. I've got area shadows on to give it a bit more realism. And you can kind of see the text is now looking as if it's more there. We've got a shadow which is being cast from the softbox in the same direction as if it were really there. But this is very sharp. The shadow of this is very, very sharp. Now Cinema 4D has three main shadow options: soft, hard, or area. Now soft shadow maps are nice for most things, quick render times, great. Hard or ray traced means very sharp, very computerized looking, or like spotlights. They tend to create ray trace type shadows. And you also have area. Now area shadows are the most realistic. They give the light depth and more of a feel, but they do have a much longer render time and they don't necessarily work for certain things like this. It doesn't really work for what we need here. So on my softbox options, I'm going to change it from area to ray traced. Now if you are just using a standard light, that's all you need to do is come to your shadow options. So if I just create a light for demonstration purposes, if you come and create an omni light, and then on your shadow options just go from none to ray traced hard. It is as simple as that. Make sure your light is facing the right way, so the light would need to be up here, and it'll cast the shadows in the right way regardless. So when that rendered, you've seen the shadows weren't quite right. So on the softbox, if you are using the softbox, the shadow options are just by here. Drop down menu, from area to ray traced. So if we give it a render now, you should see that our shadows become a lot more defined, a lot sharper. You can clearly see that that item is there and behind light. Now, they're a lot darker than this, so they just look too unrealistic, they look as if they shouldn't be there. So on our softbox options, same goes for if you're using a standard light, just bring the brightness down. Not too much, but I've gone to 60% just to see if that helps a little bit, and really it hasn't really done much. But there could be a very simple reason for that. When you work with lighting and reflections, really you should use global illumination. Now, global illumination can take a lot longer to render, but the effects it gives are a lot better, a lot cleaner, a lot more realistic than having 5-10 lights in a scene to try and recreate it without it. So what we want to do is come to our render settings, click on Effect, then Global Illumination. Now, for the sake of this, I'm going to take it from medium. So for our samples and our density, I'm going to put it from that to low and the density to preview, just so it renders a lot quicker in my window. Obviously, when you render the final image, it's probably best to put it back up to medium. And then we're going to give it another render. Now you're going to see we have all these different lights and grey dots. That's just Cinema 4D working out how the light should look if it were, well, real. Now you can instantly see that I have lost pretty much most of my shadows. They're a lot softer, they're a lot more realistic, but they're still not quite dense enough. So perhaps we need to put our light back up a little bit. I mean, they're still visible, but they're not that visible. So let's put our light back up to 100%. See if it works okay with the global illumination enabled. Give it another render. Shouldn't take a few seconds. And now I can see straight away that now our light's a bit brighter, our shadows are also darker. Now, they could do with being a bit darker again to match the shadow coming from the car from the real picture. Now with the softbox, that's again, it's extremely easy. Nick from Grayscale Gorilla has developed an awesome kit. If you don't have the Light Kit Pro, I definitely recommend getting it. There's so many options, so many things you can create, and you don't really need global illumination to use them. Although for times like this you will. So back to our shadow options, we have shadow density. That's basically how dark or light the shadow is. So I put that from 100% to say, let's try 150%. And we give it another render. You should now see that our shadows have become a lot darker, and they now match the car a bit better. Obviously our render time is getting longer because you're doing more options, it has to do more samples, but it's still not a ridiculously long time to render one image. I mean, most people with stuff like this will only actually render one picture and then perhaps they'll animate it in After Effects or any other program to make it look as if it's moving a bit more. But you can see straight away that text looks a lot better with those shadows. And that's pretty much it. I mean, that's all it is to it. It's all about lighting. As long as you align your grid or your plane or your object to something that's on your image, everything should just work. There's no other way of really doing it quick or easy. So to run through it once again, you create a background, a sky. We add a composition tag to our sky and untick scene by camera. Then we want to create a plane, make the plane nice and big, make a new material, add our texture to the material, then drag that onto our background. Also drag it onto our plane, but with our plane make sure it's not UVW mapping, it is frontal. Then on our plane, make sure we have a compositing tag on that as well, and that compositing background is ticked. Then add your object, add your lighting, and render. And that's where we are now. You can get it to look a bit better. I mean, if I added some fillet caps to the text, it would look that much better straight away. If you can, you should always use fillet caps on text because it makes them look a lot more realistic. Other than that, yeah, I've included this picture, the one I've used. So if you don't have your own picture, feel free to download that and give it a go. If you do manage to create this or something like it, please send me a link to the picture or post a video response or whatever you plan to do. Try and show me. Leave a comment below. Again, if you have any problems, feel free to message me, inbox me, whatever. And yeah, I'll see you guys soon.